I have noticed a really terrifying and insidious trend on the pro-choice side over the last few years.
I will always value this over this. It's lacking sentience.
I am literally daring you, try to give some explanation for this immaterial value and worth without appealing to the image of God. The fact of the matter is that you can't. Welcome to Unsafe Media. My name is Ryan Martin. I help you respond with wisdom and virtue to the ideas and the movements that are shaping our generation. I have noticed a really terrifying and honestly insidious trend on the pro-choice side over the last few years. See, we used to simply argue as to whether or not the baby was alive, and in order to justify the pro-choice side, they would always adopt really meaningless and unscientific ideas, like it's just a clump of cells, or that if abortion is murder, then nocturnal emissions would be genocide. And while those positions were honestly idiotic from a scientific perspective, at least they had a moral sense to them, because really what was happening is we were agreeing that if it was a living human, then you can't kill it. It would be an innocent human, and this would be considered immoral or murder. But as the science is marshaled over and over and over again for the pro-life side, what you're beginning to see is the pro-choice side is conceding and retreating backwards to a really horrifying and morally abominable position. They're admitting the life of the child, and rather they're looking for ways around its right to life. The idea is that yes, it's a living human. Life begins at conception. This is the earliest stage of human development. Admitting that, is it still okay for a mother, therefore, to intentionally kill this human being of hers? And they say yes, because her right to bodily autonomy, her right to do whatever she wants with her body, includes the right to intentionally kill her child. Now, when stated that plainly, that seems immediately to be a reductio ad absurdum. Surely you can't simply kill your kids because you can do what you want with your body. It's their body. And so what they try to do is they try to justify it, and they say, well, her bodily autonomy trumps their right to life because, and that's where the sentience argument comes in. Because they're not sentient, because they're not self-aware, this seemingly immediately implies to the pro-choice proponent that therefore their life is meaningless, their life can be thrown away for whatever reason the mother so deems fit.
I will always value this over this, because this is a group of people with thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams, desires. They have sentience, which means they have consciousness. They have their own thoughts and feelings. This has none of that. It's lacking sentience, which is the one thing that distinguishes us as humans.
As I was scrolling through TikTok the other day, I came across a young theologian and philosopher named Brooks Phillips. He addresses this personhood or sentience argument, and he presented 8 sound arguments. I'm going to draw from a lot of what he said, and I'm going to represent it, some with my own flair, some with my own specific arguments. But I want to give shout out to him. He did a fantastic job. Definitely go follow him on TikTok. And he also has a YouTube channel. I can only hope that he will soon post content there as well. The first 3 reasons I'm going to give for why this is such a terrible argument fall underneath what I'm going to call correlation problems. That's because the problem comes from trying to correlate sentience with human rights or human value. The first is what I call the animal equivalence problem. If you correlate the right to life with some level of sentience, then that would mean that many animals have the right to life as well, which would include even things as simple as mice. It's been shown scientifically that mice have a low level of sentience, and what that would mean is that fumigating, say, a barn and killing 50 mice would be identical at a moral level, not at a scientific material level, they're different kinds of creatures, but at a moral level, that'd be identical to gassing 50 people in a chamber. That results in pretty much an immediate reductio ad absurdum. Surely the life of rats should not be as highly valued as the life of humans, and therefore you can't simply draw a correlation, sentience equals right to life. Second is what I call the arbitrariness problem. This is because at this stage, the pro-choice proponent would probably say something to the extent that, well, those levels of sentience are so low that we really shouldn't count that. And rather, we should count only the higher forms of sentience. But this is now an arbitrariness problem because you just have to guess or randomly pick one level of sentience over others. There's nothing objective. There's no demarcation, scientifically speaking, between a valuable level of sentience and a non-valuable level of sentience. That's not a scientific measurement. So you just have to pick. Now, from there, they may try to avoid the the arbitrariness problem, by moving to sort of a gradation. So they would say that just as sentience is on a gradation or a spectrum, so is value. So the more sentience you have, the more value you have. Therefore, humans, being more sentient, have more value than mice. Problem solved. But that destroys our sense of human equality, because humans come at a gradation of the levels of sentience. Younger people have less sentience, less self-awareness, less personhood than do older people, which is literally the case in this argument. We're saying that because these humans are alive, but at this lower level of development, and therefore at this lower level of sentient development, it's literally okay to kill them. This wouldn't simply apply to people in utero. This would apply, obviously, to people outside the uterus as well. But it wouldn't just be an age thing, because levels of sentience seem to be correlated not just to how old you are, but also your IQ, which would mean that when comparing two individuals with disparate IQs, you would seemingly want to favor the one in terms of moral value and human rights. And God forbid we ever come across some level of group disparity in IQ between this subgroup and that subgroup, because then we would have this situation where they should have more rights and presumably the ability to do some level of harm to these people. If we let mothers kill babies because babies aren't sentient enough, why couldn't we let X group oppress Y group? Because, well, it's not quite killing, and they do have a standard deviation higher IQ. Of course that's insanity, and of course that's despicable, but it's hard to see how that's not an implication of this gradation view. My fifth argument against the sentience view of human worth is that it's what I'm going to call the moral obligation problem. What it would actually do is it would suggest that mothers have less obligation to their children when they have less sentience. But actually, our moral intuition says quite the opposite. A mother would not be in any sense out of her rights to simply say to her 26-year-old, "I'm no longer going to spoon feed you. You need to grow up." But a mother who did that to her 26-hour-old baby would be rightly castigated as one of the most loathsome members of our entire civilization. In our common law practice, as well as in our moral intuitions, we generally consider a parent's obligation to their child to be in an inverse relationship to their level of sentience. The less sentient they are, the greater obligation the parent has to take care of that child. So it's the exact opposite of this argument, which says that because this child has the least amount of sentience, the parent can simply off them. Our sixth argument is a really common one for the pro-choice side against the sentience argument. It's the Coma argument, but I'm going to try to include the pro-choice response and see why that absolutely fails. The argument goes something like this. People in comas don't have sentience either, and you can't simply walk up to them and stab them. You can't just kill them. And the pro-choice side usually agrees with that. And they say, but it's on the basis of something else that this human has worth. And frequently they appeal to the fact that this person, this human, had past sentience. They already were sentient. And Brooks makes this point pretty brilliantly. That would also imply that dead people, say dead for 4 or 5 centuries, also have the right to life because at one point they too were sentient. Of course, that's a reductio ad absurdum. Now, let's actually take this situation significantly further. Let's assume this person is not just in a coma. They've suffered complete brain trauma, but we have a new nanotechnology treatment that's already been administered. You can't reverse it. Now, what will happen is over the next 9 months, these nanobots will completely repair any sort of brain damage that has occurred in this individual. And so sentience will be established again in this person in 9 months. The only thing you have to do is not actively and intentionally kill them. What is shown from that is that sentience in the present is not the requirement for the right to life. Quick interlude. If you haven't joined my Patreon, you probably think that Steven Pinker is an impressive moral philosopher. If you don't know why that's a burn, just keep watching, you'll see. Now to my 7th argument, this is what I'm going to call the Pinker problem. The simple fact of the matter is that newborns don't have any more sentience than babies in utero just a few days prior. And if it's justifiable to kill a baby in the womb because it doesn't have sentience, it's not the womb that makes it okay, it's the sentience. The inescapable conclusion from that is that therefore it would be okay to kill babies outside the womb so long as it's really close to when they were born. And the reason this is called the Pinker problem is because that's the exact conclusion drawn by Steven Pinker and Michael Tooley, who he seems to be drawing a lot of his inspiration from. Now, it should go without saying, but we live in clown world, so it doesn't. If your moral premise leads to the justification of killing newborns, you're the bad guy, you should abandon that premise. Now, the last argument that he presented that I had never actually heard before is called the Anencephalic Argument. And I do have to admit that I just learned to pronounce that by Googling it. So if I'm saying it wrong, blame Google. And just to give a little bit of clarification, anencephaly is whenever you are missing, when you're born missing a large portion of your brain, essentially meaning that you will never have the capacity to be self-aware or sentient. Now, let's compose a thought experiment for just a moment. Imagine an incredibly happy couple, young, married, vibrant, healthy, everything going great, and they just got pregnant. They're so excited for their child to be born. And then something happens. The husband gets sick or has an injury or something just absolutely horrible, and he's going to die without an insane amount of medical debt and without a lump sum of money that he simply couldn't possibly afford to buy some prescription or some treatment. Now, in this thought experiment, imagine two men came up to this couple. They heard about what had happened, and they had a rather nefarious proposition for them. They said that if they were willing to donate their child to this organization upon its birth, then they would cover all the man's medical expenses. He'd be healthy, the mother would be healthy, and they'd be able to go on and have more children. Just don't worry about this one. And they assure them, don't worry. Your child will not suffer even a moment under our care. And the way that they guarantee it is they say that we're going to perform a simple procedure, as invasive, if not less invasive, than an abortion. And what we're going to do is we're going to inhibit the development of the neural tube. Your baby just simply won't develop, will induce anencephaly. And what that means is that your baby right now is not sentient. It won't know what's happening. And your baby, therefore, will never become sentient. So you never have to worry that your child is going to suffer, whether we harvest their organs or have some other nefarious hope or aspiration for them. You don't have to worry about them ever suffering. They won't be sentient. There's no past sentience. There's no future sentience. Now, if sentience was the arbiter of human value and human life, human worth, human rights, then this child, the parents would be doing nothing morally wrong to this child. Of course, our intuitions are the exact opposite, and it's because self-awareness is actually an accident of our nature. It's not a substance. Aristotle had this idea that things were composed of two aspects. It's substance and it's accidents. I am Ryan Martin. I am a human. That's my substance. I also have 10 fingers, but say I'm in a terrible accident and I lose 3 of them. I'm a 7-fingered man. I'm still a human and I'm still Ryan Martin. My accidents have changed, not my substance. When I go to sleep, I lose my sentience. If I'm in a coma, I lose my sentience. But I'm still me and I'm still a human. And what this shows is that our human rights must come from our substance. What we truly are by nature, by our ontology, has to be that which possesses human rights, as opposed to our accidents. It can't be that bald men have human rights, or that children have human rights, or that sentient people have human rights. No. They're human rights. And that's the correct way to phrase it, because it is our humanity that possesses the rights, not any of our other qualities. So then what is the solution? Where do human rights come from? They have to come from some sort of immaterial, metaphysical basis, foundation. And that's because this is not a physical thing. We can't reach inside of somebody and pull out their human rights. It's not a physical attribute of the human. This is by definition immaterial. Now you may say, I don't believe in that sort of stuff. Of course you do. Don't kid yourself. If you say that women have the right to do what they want with their body, rights are immaterial. Again, there's no part in the body that houses them. This isn't found in your physicality. So it has to be something metaphysical. And I am literally daring you, try to give some explanation for this immaterial value and worth that is not arbitrary, that can't be easily knocked down without appealing to the image of God. The fact of the matter is that you can't. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Martin. This is Unsafe Media. Like, share, subscribe, jump onto the Patreon, reminding you to trust God and keep your powder dry.